I want to touch on one topic that is really controversial in Bitcoin, and I think you also touched on it in some of your videos. I always say that 0.1 Bitcoin will be plenty and will be really good, and like can potentially retire even your family, depending on where you live and what your definition of retirement is. But I get a lot of backlash from that whenever I say that, and I think most Bitcoiners aren't actually bullish enough on Bitcoin. It feels like people don't grasp the full potential of Bitcoin, and they only look like, oh, like what's the total addressable market? Like maybe like it will be gold. How do you look at this whole thing of like 0.1 Bitcoin, retirement, and what's the full potential of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot of videos out there circulating that kind of have the 0.1 thing going, and it's very topical at the moment. And you know, the way I look at it is, when I first got started in Bitcoin, I was I was focused on a target. So I kind of had in mind, once I'd done a certain amount of study, a certain amount of work, I'd read the book Bitcoin Standard, started listening to Robert Breedlove, Michael Saylor, quite a bit with Andreas Antonopoulos. And so once I'd sort of been down the rabbit hole and I decided, well, hey, this makes sense for me to get involved, I was thinking in terms of round numbers. And, you know, that was back in January 2018 that I started. But I remember about 2-3 weeks after that, the price of Bitcoin fell by about 30%. But the thing is that because I knew what I was getting into, I used that as an opportunity to stack more. And I've kind of just been following that same strategy pretty much ever since for the past 8 years. But when it comes to the 0.1 thing, you know, I think most sort of retail potential Bitcoiners, you know, they kind of see the price of Bitcoin at 100K and it kind of scares them off. And they think, well, you know, the potential for me to get to one whole Bitcoin is kind of out of reach. And so rather than people kind of feel like they've missed the boat, or they're too late to Bitcoin, I like to say to them, well, look, you have to understand where we are on the adoption curve with this asset. This is kind of like the internet 1999. And, you know, just because you didn't buy a Bitcoin like Max Kaiser or somebody for, you know, for $1 or under $1 or whatever it was in 2010, 2011, you can still get a decent foothold into Bitcoin. And so when I look at 0.1 and I look at Bitcoin's historical compound annual growth rate over the last decade, sitting at 55 to 60%. And if you put, you know, $10,000, which is 1/10 of a Bitcoin, into that reverse Kager calculator, and if Bitcoin, even if it does 50% over the next 15 years, then you're sitting at about 4.2 million US dollars. And so it just helps to give people a little perspective that if they allow the compound, you know, the law of compounding to really do its thing, you know, it's not too late for them to set themselves up for a very comfortable retirement if they have a 10 to 15 year time horizon. So, you know, for me, it's all about just making people understand that there is no better investment, I believe, than Bitcoin. You're not too late. If you just break it down into bite-sized pieces and kind of start at 0.1 as a target, because I believe that anybody who's kind of in their, you know, 40s or 50s who is thinking about retirement in 10 to 20 years, if they put their mind to it, they can get to 0.1, you know. So that's kind of my theory around it. And I find that most of the people I talk to, I do a lot of one-on-one sort of consultations with people in that age bracket. And most of them already are at 0.1. So they're just looking to sort of build that stack and get their self-custody in the right setup and all of that. So that's how I see it.
It's really good. And I think we also should not forget that 0.1 Bitcoin at the current price, it's almost $10,000. So that's a lot of money. That's more money than most people on Earth have. Like the average person on Earth doesn't have $10,000 in a savings account. You're already above the 50% line, maybe even like above the top 40% in the world when you have that amount, even if Bitcoin stays at the same purchasing power right now. So that's something I think to consider. I think a lot of those comments and say like, oh, like 0.1 Bitcoin is not enough. They might have like 100K, maybe 200K of expenses each year. And of course, like then like 0.1 Bitcoin will take a while till you can retire on that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I guess, we live in a big world where, 8 billion people, and we understand that most people, in the end are going to need Bitcoin for its purchasing power, preservation, qualities. But, I think in the future, we're going to be thinking in terms of Satoshis, not in terms of Bitcoin. And so, a lot of people don't understand that 0.1 is like, 10 million Satoshis. And, there's a belief that at some point, maybe not in our lifetime, but maybe in our, my kids' lifetime, we're going to see Satoshi and dollar parity, because Bitcoin is kind of a monetary system that is designed to actually reprice the world. So yeah, it's, I think eventually we're going to cross that point where we won't be talking about Bitcoin as much as we're actually talking about sats.
Very, very true. I love that. And you touched on it a little bit. I completely forgot my first question today that I usually ask. The question is like, who are you and what are you doing and why are you excited about Bitcoin? Maybe give us a little bit of a background, like what are you doing with the retirement consulting and who you are?
Yeah, great. So I'm 52. I came to Bitcoin in 2018. I heard about it in 2013. Just like everybody else, the first time I heard about it, I dismissed it. I thought it was crazy. It didn't make sense. At the time, I was very busy in my business for 15 years. My wife and I were hosts of a seminar company in Australia. We founded the company in 2005. And so for 15 years, we basically promoted and facilitated live seminars around the country, mainly in the health and wellness and personal development space. And then in 2020, COVID came along and it was an opportunity for us to rethink because we couldn't travel and do the events. And that was when I really, even though I'd been in Bitcoin for a little while, that was kind of the time where I really started to pay very close attention and really double down on my study and my learning about Bitcoin. And it's kind of been that way ever since. For the last 5 years, I've been very much down the rabbit hole, always learning though. I feel like Bitcoin is something that you can never stop learning. Every time you think you know everything there is to know about Bitcoin, you hear something else from somebody like Jeff Booth or, CJ Konstantinos or somebody like that. And you go, wow, I never thought of it that way. And so I'm always learning, but for me, I see Bitcoin and the thing that drew me to Bitcoin was I've always been involved in real estate investing, and in Australia we've always had this love affair with property and real estate, and most Australians think that real estate is the best performing asset. Most of our wealth is tied up in real estate or the family home, but whatever it was, when I came back to Bitcoin in 2017, I actually, somebody else said to me, hey, have you heard about this Bitcoin thing? And I said, yeah, I've heard about it, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And then I signed up for a publication out of there was a publisher in Melbourne there was a gentleman by the name of Sam Volkering, and he put out this whole publication on essentially Bitcoin, Ethereum, and XRP. And it was basically, Bitcoin is the digital gold, Ethereum's going to be the new internet where everything is going to be built on top of it, and XRP is going to be the new money. And so that just really got my interest, and that's kind of where I've been with Bitcoin ever since. But For me, it was really I started out with Bitcoin because I thought, well, if this really is a finite asset, then I want to have a piece of it, right? Even though I don't really understand what it is and how it's going to work, the fact that it is the only finite asset that humanity has ever known, for me, I feel like I need to have some part of that, and kind of that was the start of it. But I've come to realize over several years now that there's so much more to Bitcoin than just that, and I think I'm in the camp with the likes of Peter Dunworth, who's another great Australian guy, Bitcoiner, who is very vocal in this space, and I think he's one of the top voices in the space. I believe that we've crossed the chasm now as far as Bitcoin. The potential of Bitcoin failing or going to zero is off the table, because essentially we now have endorsement from the biggest entity on earth, which of course is the US government. And whether you like that or not, I think that's just a reality that was always going to happen if Bitcoin survived to this point. I think it's all good things ahead for Bitcoin, and I'm just so happy to be a part of this community, because all I see is the smartest minds on earth all sort of working together to help people, and that's why I love it.
That's an amazing thing. Yeah, just really quickly, I love Jeff and CGK, as you mentioned it. Both have been actually 2 times on the podcast already. And funny enough, with CGK, I record the third round in 6 hours or something like that. So I'm looking forward to that. It's funny that you bring him up the day I record with him also. You mentioned crossing the chasm. I think that's something a lot of Bitcoiners kind of talk about. Do you think it's all about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, or why are we now across the chasm, and what does this actually mean?
Yeah, well, I think Michael Saylor says it best. I mean, we all love what Michael Saylor has done for Bitcoin, but when he says that the most important defining moment for Bitcoin, the beginning of the Bitcoin gold rush, which essentially goes back to January 2024, was when the SEC approved the ETF, and so I think that was step one. And then step two was the US government, finally making a decision that they were going to endorse Bitcoin and start utilizing it as a strategic asset. I mean, I haven't heard how they're actually going to acquire the 1 million Bitcoin that they intend to acquire, because apparently they want to do it in a budget neutral fashion without raising taxes and without, printing money. There is some talk that maybe they're going to dispense with some of their gold reserves, which would be fascinating if they were to do that. But I think that all of these events that have taken place have kind of led us to this point where governments around the world are indebted. They know that they can't raise enough in taxes from the people because it's politically unpopular to do that. Yes, they have access to the big red button to print money, but all that does is drive inflation and a cost of living crisis and growing wealth gap, and we see all the problems in society that's creating. And so I just think that if Bitcoin remains decentralized and secure, as the great Jeff Booth keeps telling all of us, then Bitcoin is eventually going to take over the financial system, is what I believe. And so yeah, that's, I think, when those critical events that have taken place in the last 18 months. Give me immense confidence moving forward into the future, and I think a lot of other people as well.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how many good news they came. There was a tweet that I recently saw, I think from Nico from Simple Bitcoin. He tweeted out, "It's the best cycle for news in Bitcoin, but it's the worst cycle for price action." And yeah. I kind of find it funny because I'm amazed how much good news and how less bad news, how less FUD is out there. Even if I go out in outside of a little bit outside of my bubble and talk with people in Austria, yeah, they might not like Bitcoin. They might like, oh, it's a little volatile, but there's not a really big reason they don't buy it. They mostly are just too lazy to do the do the work. So I feel like we have everything ready, and it's just not the same excitement as it was years ago. And my theory, and I'm curious how you think about that. My theory currently is just like, yeah, it's institutional money that drives the price, and retail is completely sleeping on Bitcoin currently.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. But I think that, I did a video today on my channel, and I was talking about how people are going to come to Bitcoin either by choice or by force, and I think that, even though retail is asleep and the price action has been stagnant, we have to remember that Bitcoin crossed 100K for the first time in, was it December or November last year?
I think
Towards
November
the end of the year. When was it?
I think it was November. I can look it up next
Yeah,
to when you talk.
So I mean, that was a defining moment. I mean, I remember the time when we crossed 10,000, and everyone was like, "How did that happen?" It's like, we just keep forgetting these little milestones that are taking place right before our eyes, and then, I think that generally speaking, because Bitcoin is such a dynamic asset, and it's a very youthful asset. I mean, it's still an adolescent. I mean, I raised 3 girls, so I know what it's like to have 3 16-year-olds growing up, and so Bitcoin's a 16-year-old 16-year-old baby, so it's going to have its ups and downs, right? And we have to understand that anything that is that young is going to it's going to be volatile, and so it's. I just think people are impatient. We've probably been spoilt in the early days with Bitcoin about how explosive the moves are. But I think this is just an evolution of this asset. It's going to it's at some point the compound annual growth rate is going to level out. But I still think that all of the growth is ahead of us, given where we are on the adoption curve, and what less than 3% or 3.5% of the population worldwide has any exposure to Bitcoin. So I think it's all ahead of us. I just think that Nico's right. It's all this great news, but not a lot of price action. But I think it's gonna happen, and we'll all be very pleased. But we just have to remember with all of this too, Robin, like, I'm a great believer in everything that Jeff Booth says about how most people measure Bitcoin still from the fiat system. We're all trying to measure our life through a broken money system when it comes to being a Bitcoiner. But at some point, we've got to start rewiring our thinking and start thinking in terms of Bitcoin and Satoshis, and how that is actually the value system, and repricing all of the stuff on the debt-based side. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's a moment when you no longer say, hey, this house is $250,000. You say, oh, this house is 0.56 Bitcoin. It's the moment when you default do, hey, I want to earn in Bitcoin, I want to transact in Bitcoin, I want to spend in Bitcoin, and I declare my wealth in Bitcoin, and I measure how much better I got when I have in Bitcoin, in Satoshis. How many more Satoshis did I get this month versus last month? That's the measurement, and no longer US dollar. And I did that for my personal life. I completely denominated everything from net worth and everything like that in Satoshis, which makes it way easier and a lot less emotional. If you just have a set amount of Satoshis that increases slightly every month, it's great. It's going up linearly. It's nice growth. if you have denominated in US dollar, you see jumps up and down and you're like, oh shit, like that's like so volatile. But that mind shift, and I'm a big believer in the people that make that mind shift earlier, like not just buy Bitcoin, but make that mind shift to Bitcoin, will benefit the most, because they get that you've met probably also some OGs that have been in Bitcoin since like two cycles or more. They have some, and I'm not one of those. I'm just like one cycle, a little bit more than one cycle here. They have that Zen feeling about them. They are so calm. They are so in the moment, and they all do the same thing. They just have Bitcoin and they buy Bitcoin when they have fiat, and they spend Bitcoin if they need some money, because they're just all in Bitcoin. And they don't care about the volatility. They don't play the fiat games. They just like, hey, I have Bitcoin. That's my life. And this Zen calmness is amazing. That's where I try to get. Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.